Today we have David Mckay on Harshaneeyam podcast. Born and educated in the United States, David Mckay is an award-winning translator of Dutch fiction and non-fiction. He holds degrees in philosophy, linguistics, and international relations, and has lived in The Hague since 1997. His literary translations include War and Turpentine by Stefan Hetmans, which was longlisted for the International Booker Prize in 2017, and Multatuli's classic Max Havelaar, as well as contributions to the Penguin Book of Dutch Short Stories. He has given talks, led workshops, and written articles on translation topics, served as a judge for translation prizes, contributed to the Dutch English dictionaries, and acted as an advisor to the American Translators Association and the Dutch Foundation of Literature. He is the translator of Annie Danius' The Remembered Soldier, which was longlisted for the International Booker Prize 2026. Here is David Mckay.
Well, I started reading really early in life, so that was one that long before I have memories now. I mean, my mother claims I started reading before I was 3 years old. I don't know if that's literally true or not, but I was very young, I'm sure, and and I always had a book with me. Being engrossed in a book was always part of my life for longer than I can remember. And I think and my family lived in Italy for a year. My father was a professor, a philosophy professor, so he taught at a branch of his university in Florence for a year when I was 7 and 8 years old.
You remember any of that?
Yeah, I remember it a little bit. Yeah, and it's not that I learned Italian fluently or became that I have a second culture or anything like that. But I did go to an Italian language school while I was there. So I learned enough to get by, and I was surrounded by it. It made me very aware of there being kind of many languages and many perspectives in the world, and that I could be in a place where I was the outsider and other people were normal, and I didn't know what was going on. So which I think is a healthy experience to have, at a young age, and it also is the kind of thing that opens your mind to possibilities like becoming a translator, that makes something like that feel real for you. Yeah. Yeah, and also because we were in Europe, because we were near the UK, I read probably different children's books than I would have read otherwise. So I read a lot of books in translation, and some of my favorite books as a child were the Moomin books from Finland, or Heidi from Switzerland, or yeah.
All in English.
All in English, yeah.
Then how did you get into translation?
I got into translating books because, well, first we moved to the Netherlands. So I met my Dutch partner when we were both graduate students in the Boston area. And we were studying linguistics. We were in a PhD program, but we both decided to stop after getting our master's degree. So we both didn't go on to the PhD. And I had always expected I would do that, but then I was there, and it felt too abstract, it felt too theoretical for me. I felt like I wanted to do something that felt more like, I mean, in retrospect, knowing now what I'm doing, I could say, I wanted to be making things. I wanted to have kind of a product that I could be happy about, more that wasn't just a theory. But at that time, I was kind of just at a loose end. So we had talked about maybe moving to France together, but my partner is from the Netherlands. It was easier to come back there and have the support of her family, and so that's why we came here. I studied Dutch here for a short time, for a year actually. Formally studied it at the university here.
When was this?
This was in 1997 that we came here. Late 1997 we came here. I started doing a little literary translation. I started off with a a comic strip, or these days you would call it a graphic novel, because it was actually sort of a book length story told in comic strips, but kind of a classic Dutch comic strip. I forget what the British name is, but Tom Poes, about a cat and a bear who are, and there are lots of very funny voices in that book. So it's a way to learn it was a good way to learn lots of registers of the language, and also trying to translate it into English for myself was a real challenge, and not just a challenge of understanding it, but also a challenge for my writing skills. So once I started doing that, I realized I enjoyed it, and I realized it was something I had felt confident about, that it was a way of putting, I had studied linguistics. It was a way of sort of putting my understanding of language to work in a different way. And I started looking for work in that area. But so right from the beginning, literary translation was part of that, and not just this comic book, but I was also reading a lot of Dutch stories and things. And very early on, I discovered some of the stories and authors that I still love now. Yeah.
Yeah, about the comic strips. In fact, I spoke to one Japanese translator, and he was saying it's very difficult to translate comic strips because you don't have much space and you can't give any additional information, no glossing. It's very difficult to do that. What has been your experience?
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of that professionally since then, but it's true. And and the same kinds of things come up with subtitles. So I've done a couple of translations that had to be used that way. It comes up whenever there's a question of limited space. I also do a lot of translation of art books and museum catalogs. And there was a period when I did a lot of translation of museum exhibitions, and often there are real space limitations there. You have a label, and the label can have at most 25 words on it or something, and you have to make it work in that space. Yeah.
Now, tell me about your website. The name sounds very interesting. It's called Open Book Translation. Now,
Yeah.
I was searching for your name, as your website's name. Then I found Open Book Translation. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I first started as a freelancer, maybe I should rewind a little bit. When I actually became a translator, I for a very short time I was freelancing and working for different agencies and things, but I pretty quickly found a job working for the Dutch government. So I worked for the Dutch government in a translation department full time, the national government. From like 1999 to about 2007, I worked for and that was where I really learned to translate well, because you're sort of thrown into the deep end there. You had to try to translate all kinds of different documents, from legislation to speeches to kind of puff pieces about how wonderful it is to go on vacation in the Netherlands. And I needed to learn to do it all in British English too. So that gave me some more flexibility in terms of, using different varieties of English. And that was so I'm really grateful for that. That's a kind of training you can't get anywhere else, but working in a department like that, there really aren't a lot of places at all. But at some point I was ready for something new. Yeah. And at that point I thought I would mostly just be doing more commercial freelance translation, maybe doing a lot of work for museums, which is also most of what I did in the first few years that I was freelancing. Mostly art translation, also some academic books, Dutch history, that kind of thing. And I thought, okay, so I need a name for my business. I was literary translators are more sort of in artist mode. They're doing things under their own name, but I started out kind of in business mode, thinking, okay, I'm going to have a small business and I need a name for it. And Open Book Translation I thought was nice because it reminded me of it was a reminder to myself of how I wanted to work with people, just being open with people. Yeah. Yeah.
Now I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
So there are no collaborators. You are alone working for Open
Right.
Book
There are no
Translation.
permanent collaborators. I do a lot of projects, both more commercial projects or art books or things, or other projects or literary projects too with other people. I like collaborating a lot, but I don't. But open book translation is just me, and I collaborate sort of ad hoc with other people.
Now, David, would you please introduce the novel The Remembered Soldier?
It's important to avoid spoilers when talking about this novel. So the thing to say about the novel is it opens in an asylum in the Belgian town of Ghent, and we're introduced to this man who was a soldier in the First World War. It's now a few years after the First World War. He's been living there ever since the war because they found him after a battle with amnesia, unable to remember his own name or identity or where he came from. Um, and took him there, and he's been living there with other people who have various kinds of mental issues, some less serious and some more serious, and you can see that he's a very highly functional person other than this amnesia. He's a fairly normal person, except that he has no sense of identity and no real sense of self. um, and they've put advertisements in the paper asking, does anybody know this man? Asking people to come and give them information, to actually asking people to write. First of all, so they have lots of letters that they've received from mostly women saying, "Oh, this could be my husband, this could be my son," and when it seems plausible, they invite the women to come and take a look at him and be interviewed. Why do you think this is your husband? Um, and so he's sort of in the middle of this, preparing for a day of these kinds of interviews with women he doesn't recognize coming in. um, and we actually see a couple of those unfolding, and how horrifying it is for him. These women he doesn't recognize, and they come in, and he has feelings about them. He's attracted to them, or he's horrified by them, or he's bored by them, or whatever he feels. And then a few minutes later, it's over because they say, no, this isn't him, or the doctor doesn't believe them. He says, no, I can see that this is not your husband, or that they betray themselves in some way. So I think it's the third or fourth interview with a woman is a woman who's actually able to make a good case. She immediately says, yes, this is him. I recognize him, um, and and is able to convince the doctors. And as soon as she does, she says, no, I want to go home with him right away. They say, well, let's keep him here for a few weeks and he can adjust to the idea and you can come and visit. And she says, no, I'm taking him home tomorrow. And the next day he goes home with her, and he hasn't been out of the asylum in years. He doesn't have memories of living anywhere else in the asylum, so everything is new. They go on the train together, and the being on a train is new. And they go to the place, and she says, okay, this is your home, and it's totally new to him. She says, these are your children, and he doesn't recognize them. And so it's about him adjusting to that, and the two of them trying to find a way to live together, and that turns out to be complicated for many reasons you might anticipate and reasons you might not anticipate at all. And meanwhile, he's still very haunted by the war, and in the asylum, he's been able to find a kind of way of getting by, and he doesn't have that many nightmares. But once he's out of the asylum, the nightmares and the memories of the war start to come back to him, and he has to start coping with that. And progressively more and more starts to return to him as the book goes on, and that changes him. And so there are many little twists in the book, many sort of incremental steps of, it's just a little more coming back to him, a little more changing, or he learns something about her that changes his perspective on everything. So it's a long book, but there's constantly something that's shifting in the book. Yeah.
I read in one of your interviews that you read the first paragraph of the novel, and then you decided that you have to do the translation into English.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny, Anya doesn't really even like that paragraph that much. She feels like she's never explained to me exactly what it is, but she feels like there's some kind of problem with the beginning of the book. And to me, it's perfect. I can't imagine.
What pulled you in? Is it the theme or the style of writing itself?
Um, the No, the style of the writing, definitely the rhythm of the writing. The fact that she discovered this style. That's it seems so simple if you describe it. It's lots of run-on sentences connected together with and. There's not a lot more to say about it than that. If a couple of things, but by tapping into that somehow, it just made something completely original pour out of her, and you can sense that right away when you read the book. Yeah.
So, when you're picking up a book to translate, mm, what exactly that you're looking for? Is it the style or the theme?
I probably look more closely at the style because that's what I'm thinking about as I'm translating. I'm really wrestling with the sentences, and if I don't enjoy that, if I feel like the book is badly written, then those are challenges too. But you have to work harder to actually have fun with that kind of challenge. And whereas and frankly, I mean, the Remembered Soldier in particular, people talk about how difficult it is, and there were a couple of basic choices I need to make, and then we can talk about what the challenges were. But there are also things about the style that make it very easy to translate. I mean, the fact that it's so absorbing, and the fact that the style has such momentum to it, and the fact that it's always leading you on.
And it is consistent,
Yeah, and
throughout
it's very
the.
consistent throughout the
Yes,
book.
yes.
That's right.
Now, then what happened? You loved it and you wanted to translate, and you found the publisher for that in English?
I emailed the publisher. That's right. And and he told me that another translator who's a good friend of mine had also been interested in it already. So I wasn't the first translator to discover it, but I was the first who was crazy enough to say, okay, I'm just going to. I talked to my friend, and he had tried to get some financial support to do a long sample of it, and he hadn't been able to get financial support. And I was the first who was crazy enough to say, okay, even without getting financial support in advance, I'm just going to translate a long sample. I'm going to translate some additional material so that publishers know what they're dealing with, and just start pitching it to publishers. So it was kind of just the willingness to take that risk that was the key to getting the book, to becoming the translator. Yeah. There's a difficulty about, or at least I think it's a difficulty about trying to pitch books to publishers, which is the publishers, of course, want to know the whole story. They want a synopsis, and it's really hard to write an interesting synopsis. It's really hard for me, but I think it's really hard for everyone. And when I read other people's synopses, I never find them interesting either. So I think it's everyone, and some people just go ahead and do it. And publishers, of course, are used to having to read synopses. I think what's crucial about the book really tends to fall away in a synopsis. So I did find a very detailed review of the book, which gave a lot of information about the plot of the book and the structure. But someone who was used to reviewing books and was able to write an engaging review and able to communicate a sense of what made the book so wonderful and unique. And I thought, okay, this is what I need. So I just translated that review instead, and I said, here's this.
Oh, that's a very interesting idea to pitch the book to the publisher. I read somewhere that Anya Jaine, the writer, she got this idea of writing this novel by watching a documentary while she was watching a documentary.
Yeah, I've heard that story too. Yeah. Yeah, and there's this one famous French case which she always talks about when she's the Mangin case, in which there was actually, I mean, there were a number of people like this. Apparently, there were people, soldiers in asylums after the First World War, who had amnesia, didn't know who they were anymore, and so advertisements would be put in the papers, notices, and sometimes with a drawing or a very grainy, primitive black and white photo, saying we have this person at our asylum. Do you know this man? Is this your husband? Or and people would show up saying, yes, this is my son, this is my brother, this is my husband. And in the Manjan case, there were actually two competing claims to the same person, which there was for a long time there was no way of adjudicating between them. I think eventually they figured out one person had a record of the height of their husband, and it was the wrong height or something like that. So eventually it was settled. But even then, I think it was two women saying, this is my husband, and the one woman would not give up. She said, no, I mean, maybe he got shorter during the war, or so it shows the power of wishful thinking. I think is part of what
I think this novel is about. All of it is about that.
The power of wishful thinking. Yeah, there's a lot of that in the book. Yeah, and she can. I mean, and yet through all of her books in different ways, she's looking at this kind of cluster of themes like memory, identity, and meaning in life, how we give meaning to life, and those are all kind of tied up together, and when one of them goes, the others tend to go too, right? So because he's lost his memory, he has no real sense of self anymore, and he also doesn't quite know how to give meaning to his life. The character in this book, and for a lot of the book, routine replaces any real sense of meaning. That becomes the most basic way of trying to move ahead in life. Is at least there's one thing after another you can do in a fixed order, and he has that at the asylum, and and to some extent he's able to build a new routine in his new life too. And there's part of what people who don't like the book as much complain about when they read the book is, oh my gosh, a day after day, getting up and going and fetching the coal outside and lighting the fire and heating up the water, and it's always the same. And that's part of what the book is about. It's about how, partly that's how life is for all of us, that we all have these routines and the sameness of life. And each time he goes through this routine, he's in a slightly different mental place himself. So even if it's exactly the same actions, it's different to him. Yeah.
Almost 700 pages with a lot of wonderful detail. What kind of detailing and research has gone on behind this? As far as the writer is concerned, of course, as far as your translation is concerned. I gather that you visited that asylum too.
That's right. I visited the asylum in the book, and I visited the town where most of the action takes place, the Belgian town of Kortrijk.
It's a real town. It's a real town.
It's a real town. Yeah. And Anya did an astonishing amount of research for the book. She actually has a talk about it online, but it's in Dutch, unfortunately. I don't know if you can get automatic subtitles on YouTube or anything like that. Kind of get the gist of what she's saying. But she doesn't travel a lot, and she did not visit the locations in Belgium, but she says that's that she doesn't want to. She wouldn't have wanted to in any case, because they don't look the way they did back then, and she wants to just have the picture in her head of how it was then. She doesn't want it to be spoiled by the way they look today. And in the case of the town where they live, Kortrijk, a lot of the town was destroyed in the war, and there are a lot of new buildings. But it's a mix. I mean, I went there, and I was very happy I went there because.
No, you went there after translating it, or before?
I went there while I was translating it. Yeah, and it really gave me a sense of just distances, for one thing. When he has to run from one place to another, or take a bicycle from one place to another, what kind of scale are we talking about? There's a church that figures prominently in some parts of the book, and it was nice to be able to see that church on the inside to find out what that was like to be in there. And I actually I sat and I had dinner at a restaurant which is not in the house where they live on the main square in the second half of the book, but it was next door to to where they live. So
Even the house and studio are real. The photography studio.
yeah, the houses are real. And in fact, she found houses that where there was a. She really looked in great detail because the town has most of its records online. So she has a huge number of photos. She has thousands and thousands of photos of this town, and she was really able to reconstruct. Different streets, different squares from different angles. She drew maps. She sent me the maps she drew of, the street where they live, and she had marked all of the shops that she had information about. And she actually looked for places for them to live where there was a gap in the record, where it wasn't clear what was there, so that they could sort of fit seamlessly into history without replacing anything else. And I mean, she even went so what an example that really struck me was that she found out that a bridge was closed for part of the time period in which the book takes place. So she actually has the characters take different routes in the book because the bridge is closed. So it's mostly Agnette who did the incredible research for this book, of course, and I'm in awe of that. But I had to know a lot of things about what was going on, about objects they were using, partly because of the way, she doesn't show off her knowledge. She does all this research, but then she only tells you what you need to know for the story. So she doesn't describe the camera he's using to you in detail. She just tells you what he's doing with it. But I had to figure out, the word there, sometimes there's a word in Dutch and it could mean button, or it could mean dial, or it could mean switch. And I have to find out which one of these is it? Is it a button or a dial or a switch? Questions like that. So then I had to figure out what model is this. There's also a lot of specialized terminology around photography in a book, because photography is such a central part of the book. They have a photo studio, the main character, and yet helped partly by she had a list already. Not only did she have these maps, but she had made a list which was already on her website, available to the public, of the books she had read while writing the novel. So I had a lot of information about the research she had done. And I could look up some of the online materials that she had used, like these old photography manuals from the early 20th century. And I could actually just look up in the manual, okay, what do you call this process that he's doing? What do you call these chemicals that he's using? Things like that. And the same kinds of issues came up with the machine gun that he's using, where once again, she had figured out exactly what kind it was, exactly what model it was. And these days, you can actually go on YouTube and find someone shooting that model of machine gun.
Correct.
Yeah, it's a strange world. So I was often able to ask a question, and she would send me photos of the particular building that I was asking about, or I'd ask about the interior of the cinema that they go to see a movie at, and she was actually able to send me photos of that interior. This is what it looked like, and I could see what kinds of seats they were sitting in, so that I could translate that correctly, and how close they were to each other. So I understood what she was talking about. Yeah.
So visiting those places really helped you would say?
I think it makes the physical space, which is really important in this book, the physical space that they're in, very concrete to you. So it's once you've visited and you've walked around there, you don't really have to make an effort anymore to try to imagine them being in, what kind of square is this they're in now? What is it like for them to leave the house and go onto the street? You actually have the street in your head, and you have a square in your head, and you have the river in your head that they walk along. And so all that was very real for me, and photos help with that too, in a somewhat similar way. But walking around a place is really a kind of way of laying claim to it.
Yeah, I get it. we will talk about the translation and the challenges in translation. One, obviously, of course, it follows a particular rhythm, the whole novel. And it appears that there is repetition, but it is not completely so. There are subtle variations. And it's all about, his memory as against, the reality that is in front of him. That's the whole clash in the whole novel. So, how challenging was it? What are the challenges that you had while translating? And tell me how much time you took. 700 pages is no mean an achievement.
I spent more than a year on it, but it wasn't the only thing I was doing during that time. So I forget exactly, but I had maybe 15 months to translate it or something like that. But at the same time, I was also doing some art translation and shorter things. It's important to say that the book is set in Belgium, right? And Agnet herself is Dutch, and in fact, from the north of the Netherlands, about as far from Belgium as you can get in the Netherlands. So this is so it's not a very emphatically Belgian novel in the sense that she uses a lot of specifically Belgian words that Dutch readers wouldn't recognize or anything. She in that period it would have just been the local dialect that they were using. That's right. These days there's a kind of general Flemish. There's kind of a variety of Dutch that's spoken everywhere in Flanders, but back then it would have been their local dialect that they were speaking. And you don't really get a sense of that, and that's one advantage of the fact that she doesn't use quotation marks, so she doesn't use direct speech. There is a kind of what sort of it's all indirect speech, and if you read it aloud, it sometimes sounds like there is dialogue in it, but it's all filtered through his perception of the dialogue. So you're always in his mind. You're always understanding the world the way he understands it, and so there's not a sense of looking in as an outsider and seeing people speak some dialect you don't know. You're always right in the middle of it the way he is. But there are a few period words now and then, or words, the things that are specific to that place. And that was another advantage of actually going there. There were some funny things in the book, and a couple of things I didn't even know exactly what the words meant or what they were referring to. And when I was in the town, I could actually see, this is just what they call the local historical monument. So they're walking in the park and they pass this big historical monument to a 19th century war, and that's what they call it there in that town. But a few things like that. But the language is really pretty accessible. The vocabulary, because you're in his mind and he experiences the world as a familiar place. He experiences the country as his country, the language as his language. There's no sense of alienation in that respect. Yeah.
Here is the main issue, I guess, in translating this novel. So, how did you navigate the challenge of translating a character whose identity is a mystery to himself?
The style that she's chosen actually reflects his lack of personality. So, I mean, not only are there a lot of run-on sentences and sentences connected with "and," so there's this kind of propulsive forward quality the whole time of one thing after another. That gives the sense that he can't really assign any larger meaning to anything. And there's also a lack of logical connectives, linking sentences together. Really, and is really about the only thing that so certainly no howevers, no although, no therefores, nothing like that. But hardly even a but, once in a while. And it reflects his own inability to make a larger sense of the world than what's happening from moment to moment. Just one thing, and that gives you the sense of someone, to lose the sense of a structure to the world sort of goes together with losing your own sense of who you are. So the way he sees the world sort of reveals to you kind of his own situation and his own how desperate that is, really.
Now, what are you currently working on?
Okay, so right now I'm working on a nonfiction book, which is a book about the history of the Antwerp Cathedral, which is very academic. It was written as a PhD thesis, but it's very technical, but it's also really interesting because it's about the sensory experience of the cathedral. So there are the chapters on, and this is mostly in the 15th and 16th centuries, so way back. But she's collected all this evidence about what the smells of the cathedral were. I'm in the smell chapter now,
Oh,
so
wonderful.
yeah, and all the senses, and where what there's a tactile chapter. Where would you bump into other people, and what were sort of the rules of traffic in the cathedral, and so that's a lot of fun to work on, very challenging. And it's also Flemish Dutch, which I enjoy doing. I've done quite a bit of it, but since I don't live in Flanders, that's always a different kind of experience for me. It's different from the Dutch I use every day here in the Netherlands. So there are interesting surprises. After I'm done with that, I'm going to start Anya Danya's the third novel I've translated by Anya Danya. So there's a second one that'll be coming out later this year, and then around the time that it comes out, or a couple months before that, I'll be starting a third.
What is the second novel about?
Um, the second novel is called The Song of Stork and Dromedary, which is a hard title to explain. I think, but it's inspired by Emily Bronte, and that in sort of two ways. So the different there are 11 chapters of the book, and they tell 11 very different stories in different periods, but they're connected by this fictional early 19th century writer who's very closely modeled on Emily Bronte. And in fact, there are quotes from Bronte poems in the book, which are presented as being quotes from this fictional writer's poetry. And the whole Bronte family. There's also a sister who's like Charlotte Bronte, and there are lots of there's lots of sort of. It was fun for me as a translator because I got to do a lot of pastiche when translating, because there are letters written by the Charlotte Bronte character. There's an excerpt from the Emily Bronte character's novel, and lots of different kinds of documents in the book. But the heart of the book is 11 chapters, which are written, in something of the same way as The Remembered Soldier. There's a narrator, and there are stories from where you're very close to the main character's perspective. And they're tied together through all kinds of direct and very indirect connections to this writer, and each one of them jumps ahead by about a generation. So it goes all the way from the early 19th century to the 21st century.
So Emily Bronte, she wrote it in English. So she took her to Dutch, and you are getting her back to English.
That's right. Yeah. So in terms of the poems, it's very easy. I just have to look up the lines, put them in there. But it's challenging in terms of making it feel plausible, making it feel like.
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's okay for it to be a little strange. I think it's a very strange book. It's a different perspective on the Brontes, and I think it's okay if readers are a little surprised by it. But at the same time, I have to. It's set in the UK. I have to kind of bring it home there to some extent. Yeah.
It is getting published in the US or the UK to begin.
Both the US and the UK. Yeah. So Scribe, who does the UK and Australian editions of The Remembered Soldier, is also publishing this next one, The Song of Stork and Dromedary. And in the US, there's a different publisher. The Remembered Soldier is being published by New Vessel, and this new book is in the FSG Classic series.
Now, this third novel of Annie, what is it about?
And then this third novel is an earlier novel of hers, so earlier than The Remembered Soldier, which I'm going to be working on, and that's set fairly recently. It's set between about I think 1960 and 2000 or something like that. And it's about sculptors in the Netherlands. And there's a little bit of Italy in there too. Some of them have been trained in Italy, but and it really is kind of an inside view of that whole world, and yet actually has done some sculpting herself and learned a lot about it to write the book. So it's wonderfully detailed, and there's a real sense of like she's learned the steps in the process and the way that sculptors think, and that's a great and it's also plays around with memory because it's over a longer time period. So there's no, unlike in The Remembered Soldier, there's no amnesia in the book or anything like that, but there is kind of ordinary forgetting. You know, people say do one thing, and then 20 years later they've forgotten that they ever did that. And the chapters are presented out of chronological order. So as the reader, you're never in the same kind of mental state that the characters are. You have information that they don't because you've just seen what happens later, or you've just seen what happened 20 years before, but they also know things that you don't know yet. So it's it's a lot of fun that way.
Your recent publication was this. It's by Tilted Access Press, I guess, right? Astrid Romas.
Oh, that's right. So there's another book that just came out in the UK, and it came out a couple of years earlier in the United States. So it's been out there longer from Two Lines, which also published Rumour's other book On a Woman's Madness. But Tilted Access has published those same two books in the UK now, On a Woman's Madness, and then more recently Off-White. And On a Woman's Madness was longlisted for the Booker Prize. The translator is Lucy Scott. I didn't translate that book. She did a great job. It's a very fragmentary novel. It's very experimental. It's very personal. It demands a lot of the reader, and yeah, she did a great job with that. And I worked with her on that as her mentor. That was her first book translation.
That was her first book. Okay.
Yeah. And then Off-White, she wanted to keep working with me, so we actually are co-translators of that book. And that's also an unusual book. There are unusual things about the style, but it's a more accessible book, and I think writers who might be daunted by Astrid Rumour's other book might really enjoy this one. And it's the story of a kind of a family saga over several generations. It's very much steeped in Surinamese culture and in the different cultures in the country. There's a large Hindu population there. There's the Afro-Surinamese group. There's there are different groups of white settlers there. There are and Javanese and other groups. And it's really partly about the diversity of Suriname. It's set in the 60s, and you can date it pretty precisely. At one point, she actually hints that the song "I Don't Get No Satisfaction" has just come out, maybe a year earlier. So it's about 1966, and which when Suriname was actually still a Dutch colony. Decolonization took place pretty late in Suriname, but has really changed, is moving into a new sort of stage of its history after the war. So everything is kind of in flux. All the traditional norms of Surinamese culture are in flux. The different groups are starting to mix in a way that they didn't before. So it's a really interesting time, and it's a great read. It's about a family, mostly women, so it's about relationships between women, about mothers and daughters, grandmothers and granddaughters. There's lots of food in it, so it's a beautiful book. I hope people will discover it. Yeah.
Now, would you please read an excerpt from the novel, to begin with in English and later in Dutch, please?
This is actually a fairly atypical paragraph of the book because it's about him and his children. And people actually complain sometimes when readers who review the book will say, I wanted more of the children, or they'll say, why don't they spend more time with their children? They're definitely not helicopter parents. It's a different era. But this is one of the paragraphs in which he is with his children. And Gus and Rose are kneeling with folded hands by their bed when he comes into their bedroom, and their Hail Marys falter when they see him. But they don't ask for Mama. He sits with them at the foot of the bed and asks if they'd like to hear a story, a fairy tale perhaps, or the life of a saint. But Gus wants to know what kind of rifle he had in the war, and whether he killed a lot of Huns. And Amon says he doesn't remember anything. What? Not even about the war? Gus asks. And Amon tries to explain that the war is actually the reason he lost his memory. And Gus doesn't understand, and neither does Rose. How can you forget something that tremendous? And Amon tells them he was found at the front in Merkham and had no idea who he was. The doctors had to name him like a newborn baby. Noon Merkham, they called him. And Rose and Gus thinks his story is strange and exciting. And Rose says they could have come up with a nicer name for him. And he asks her what name she would have chosen. Raphael, she says. And Gus laughs at her and says she wants to call everything Raphael. The birds, the street, her own hair. And just imagine if she really did, he says. I was walking down the Raphael with my Raphael blowing in the wind while the Raphaels sang. And the three of them have a good laugh together about that. And couldn't the doctors make him better? Gus asks. And Amon says they tried everything. It didn't work, he says. The three of you are the only ones who can cure me. Us, Rose shouts. And Gus laughs so loud that Julianne comes upstairs, worried. Aren't you sleeping yet? She says. And Rose says they're busy making Papa better. And Gus asks Julianne if the doctors told her how to cure him. He's not sick, she says. And what if we can't make him better? Gus wants to know. Will he have to go back to the asylum then? He's not sick, she repeats. Everyone forgets things sometimes. And Gus and Rose laugh uneasily. And now it's time to sleep, she says, and she leans over them and kisses them on the cheek, and he says good night to them too, just in words, and she blows out the light, and he's sorry he can't stay a little longer with Gus and Rose and all the Raphaels. En Gust en Roos knielen met gevouwen handen naast hun bed als hij een slaapkamer binnenkomt, en hun weesige groetjes haperen als ze hem zien, maar ze vragen niet naar mama. Hij zit bij hen op het voeteneinde van hun bed en hij stelt voor om hen een verhaaltje te vertellen. Een sprookje misschien of een heiligenleven. Maar Gust wil weten wat voor geweer hij in de oorlog had en of hij veel Bosch heeft doodgemaakt. En Amand zegt dat hij niets meer weet, ook niet over de oorlog. Vraagt Gust. En Amand probeert uit te leggen dat de oorlog juist de reden van zijn geheugenverlies is. En dat snapt Gust en ook Roos niet. Hoe kun je zoiets onzaaglijks vergeten? En Amand vertelt hun dat hij bij het front in Merkham werd gevonden en dat hij geen idee had wie hij was. Als een pasgeboren baby moesten de artsen hem een naam geven. Noon Merkham noemden ze hem. En hij vraagt haar welke naam zij hem hadden gegeven. Raphaël, zegt ze. En Gust lacht haar uit en zegt dat ze alles Raphaël wil noemen. De vogels, de straat, haar eigen haar. En dan krijg je heel rare zinnen, zegt hij, zoals ik liep met wapperende Raphaël door de Raphaël terwijl de Raphaëls floten, en daar lachen ze gedrieën eensgezind om. En Gust vraagt hem of de artsen hem niet beter konden maken. En Amand zegt dat ze van alles hebben geprobeerd. Het lukte niet, zegt hij. Jullie drieën zijn de enigen die mij kunnen genezen. Wij? Roept Roos uit, en Gust lacht hard. Zo hard dat Julianne bezorgd naar boven komt. Slapen jullie nog niet, zegt ze. En Roos zegt dat ze bezig zijn met papa beter maken. En Gust vraagt Julianne of de artsen haar hebben verteld hoe ze hem moeten genezen. Hij is niet ziek, zegt ze. En hoe zit het, wil Gust weten. Als we hem niet beter kunnen maken, moet hij dan terug naar het gesticht. Hij is niet ziek, herhaalt ze. Iedereen vergeet wel eens wat. En Gust en Roos lachen, aarzelend. En nu slapen, zegt ze. En ze buigt zich naar hen toe en kust hen op de wang. En hij wenst hen ook goede nacht. Alleen in woorden. En zij blaast de lamp uit. En het spijt hem dat hij niet nog even bij Gust en Roos en alle Raphaëls kan blijven.